The 2025 NFL Draft is in the books. Some teams did great, some teams did terrible. We're going to grade them out best to worst, and we're going to talk to you guys about some of our opinions. So which teams made the most out of their draft picks this past year? Welcome to a special post-draft edition of the Sharp Football Show. I am joined by Ryan McCrystal, and we've got NFL draft grades. That's what you guys want. You want to know, did we like your team's draft picks? Did we hate your team's draft picks? Did you guys do a good job? Did you guys do a bad job? And we're going to be talking to you about that throughout the next hour. We're going to be going down from the worst team in the NFL to the best team in the NFL from a draft pick perspective. I'm joined by Ryan McCrystal, our mock draft expert over at Sharp Football Analysis. And you can get all of his draft grades online over at Sharp Football Analysis right now. If you want to head over there, you can read more information and analysis about Ryan's draft grades there. You can also read a little bit about the draft values over in an article that I wrote up at sharpfootballanalysis.com. And just to set the tone here, draft grades, Ryan's independent analysis based upon how he believes the teams performed. He incorporates talent that they acquired, use of capital, use of those draft picks. For my draft value table and analysis, which we will be showing at times to you guys on the screen here, that looks at consensus big boards where most of the experts were expecting players to be drafted. Then how far down teams went to draft a guy? Did they reach down too far to draft a guy who was ranked as one of the lower players and they drafted him really high? Or did a player fall down the draft day board and they were able to draft a player at a much lower pick than what he was supposed to be going at? That would be considered a steal. So we're going to be talking a little bit about reaches and steals, and we're going to be talking about draft grades. So let's get into it. Ryan, I'm sure you are a little bit satisfied right now being able to take a breath of fresh air after all that stress of trying to mock the first round, mock your big board. So let's talk about these teams and jump right in here with the Miami Dolphins. You graded them as having the worst draft in the league. Now, I don't think you give anybody an F. You gave them a D. So you're kind. You didn't fail them. They don't have to repeat the 2025 NFL draft or anything, but they don't get by with a very passing grade. It's just a D. Talk to us a little bit about why you hated the Dolphins draft this past year.
Yeah, I mean, it mostly comes down to their first round pick and just the choice to go after Kenneth Grant, who's really, he's basically a nose tackle. He's going to play a little bit more than just that because he's proven that he has the stamina to stay on the field. He's not one of these nose tackles that's only going to go out there for 20 snaps, but that's his strength. He doesn't offer much as a pass rusher. So if you have a run stuffing nose tackle in the NFL in 2025, there's just not a lot of value in that. I like Kenneth Grant. I think he's a good run stuffing nose tackle. The problem is that is just not very valuable anymore. In fact, just last week before the draft in his pre-draft press conference, Mike Tomlin talked about that. And he said that the nose tackle is going by the way of the fullback. It just isn't a part of our game anymore. So why would you invest in it? You would think a team was crazy for drafting a fullback in the first round. Something that's happened before. As recently as the 90s, there were fullbacks drafted in the first round. It would never happen today. We'll eventually get to the point where teams stop drafting nose tackles in the first round, but it hasn't happened yet. And so when teams like the Dolphins do it, I'm going to judge them pretty harshly because they're not at that stage of the development where they can, of the team building development, where they can go out and take such a niche position.
Yeah, and then they also did something that you weren't too happy about, and my draft value wasn't too happy about. And that is, in that first round, they traded up to get an offensive lineman, but in order to do that, they gave up several day two picks. So as a result, they did not even pick between the second and the fifth round. They didn't have a third round pick. They didn't have a fourth round pick. As a result, talk to us a little bit about the lineman that they drafted. I know you like him, but it was just a lot to give up.
Are you talking about the Dolphins here?
Yes.
Yeah, the Dolphins in the second round with Jonah Savanania, might be pronouncing that wrong. He's the one player on their board that I can see that is definitely going to play a role for them. They had a need on the offensive line. He's probably going to start. And so that's why they felt the need to move up to get him. But look at the Dolphins. Like, they're a decent team, but it's not like they're knocking on the door of a championship right now. And so to take a nose tackle in the first round, then to trade up to fill a position of need in the second round. And then that's kind of where your draft ended, because on day 3, they don't pick again until round 5. I like some of the players they drafted. They got great value on Quinn Ewers, but obviously he's not going to see the field right now. You're just going to stash him on the bench and develop him. Dante Trader, a safety from Maryland, who I think is an intriguing prospect, but he's only going to play special teams for you right out of the gate, most likely. So this looks like a draft where they added a part-time player in Kenneth Grant and one starter in the offensive guard in the second round, and they're not at the stage of team development where they can be having that type of draft and justify it.
Yeah, and which is why, rounds 1 through 5, my value chart, if you want to pop up the grades, Matt, the grades chart that we're going to be looking at here which has Ryan's grades, the other graphic that has Ryan's grades and my values overlaid next to it. Matt, if you can do, yeah, there we go. You can see the Miami Dolphins at the top of this list. They're 31st in value 1 through 5. So we didn't like their value very much at all. All right, we can go to the Jacksonville Jaguars, Ryan. They're the next worst team on the list. You gave them a C-, so a slight step up above the Miami Dolphins, but not much better. The industry, though, is very much split on this, and most people think that the Jacksonville Jaguars did a much better job than you did. From a value perspective, first 3 rounds, I have them 7th. I have them 13th overall, but I can understand some of your issues with the Jacksonville Jaguars as to why you gave them a C-. Talk to the people a little bit about it.
Yeah, I think where I differ from how other people have graded them probably has to do with our philosophy for how we're going to grade the draft. If you're just looking at the players and where they drafted them, they got the best player in the draft, number 2 overall. How can you be mad about that, right? And then they ended up with a big draft class, so there's a lot of volume there, which increases the chances of getting some hits there with their 3rd round picks, their 4th round pick, 2 in the 3rd round, 2 in the 4th round. The volume there says they'll probably hit on somebody. The reason I downgraded them so much was that the package that they traded up to get Hunter, they overpaid to such an extreme. It's the type of trade package that you might expect if you were jumping up to get an Andrew Luck or a Joe Burrow type of quarterback who's viewed as almost like this can't miss franchise quarterback. But yeah, Travis Hunter is unique, but at the end of the day, he's still a wide receiver / cornerback. And there's just not nearly as much value in that as if you're going to trade up for like an Andrew Luck or a Joe Burrow, that type of elite quarterback prospect. It's a completely different beast. And yet that's the price that they paid. And so I feel like I have to be really harsh because look, this was a bad team last year. And now they just sacrificed the 5th overall pick this year, what's very likely to be an early 1st round pick next year, plus extra draft picks in that trade as well, to go get a wide receiver cornerback. And Hunter was a number 1 player on my board, but at that position, how can you justify doing that? And then to not only in those to part with your 2nd round pick in that trade, now you're not picking again until the late 3rd round. Granted, you did have 2 3rd round picks, 2 4th round picks, so the volume was there to help. But I think they came out of this draft with 1 starter, or 1 to 2 starters, if you want to say Travis Hunter maybe counts as 2 starters. But this was a bad team, and you got 1 starter, even though he's a great player. That's a bad draft class.
Give me like 30 to 45 seconds on Bashal Tutin, the running back they got out of Virginia Tech. I know you have him listed here as your best value addition for the Jaguars in the draft. What do you think about him?
Yeah, Tugboat Tutin. I love him. Easily my favorite pick of theirs from a value perspective. He could very easily emerge as the starter within the next year or 2 there. Just an awesome blend of physicality with home run speed. I think that was a steal for them in the 4th round. Absolutely. It's just, I've still got to downgrade them overall because of the trade. But yeah, Tutin was a great pick, and I could certainly see him being a good value for them in the long run.
All right, next up, you've got the Cincinnati Bengals. You gave them a C, and I actually was a little bit more harsh than you were based upon when you incorporate some of my values when I was doing a little bit of my post-draft analysis. But talk to me a little bit about what this team added beyond Stewart. I know that you were critical about some of the other pieces that they added beyond Stewart. You listed Stewart as your instant impact and your riskiest pick. So talk to us a little bit about why Stewart checks off both those boxes for you.
Yeah, I really like Stewart, which is probably why I maybe graded them slightly better than the value turns out, because I had him among my top 10 players in this draft, which, most people had him graded as a first rounder, but not quite top 10. I love the upside. I think there was enough production from him to justify taking him that high, even though he did have a bit of a down year this past year. The year before that, he justified it and did so at a very young age, which makes me feel pretty good about projecting him moving forward. If you're a beast in the SEC, as a sophomore, odds are that you're going to project to the NFL pretty well. So the fact that he dropped off a little bit, it's concerning, which is why I listed him as my riskiest player also, but I still really like that pick. From more of a big picture standpoint with the draft, the biggest issue I had was that they double dipped on linebackers in the second and fourth round. Demetrius Knight from South, kind of like overall, but they're off-ball linebackers, and they don't bring elite speed, which kind of felt like was something that was missing with Cincinnati's defense last year. Was they needed that athlete in the middle of their defense. I think that's why they were linked to Jahad Campbell a little bit in the first round sometimes, and it may have been injury reasons why they decided to pass on him, but they needed that type of linebacker as opposed to these players who are like, they're kind of safe picks, but I don't think it really changes the dynamics of Cincinnati's defense.
I mean, rounds 2 and 3, their second and the third round pick. Demetrius Knight was expected to be drafted around 79. He goes by them at 49. Dylan Fairchild was expected to be drafted around 128. He goes at pick number 81. So both of those are reaches. And with the way that the draft capital concept works, the higher in the draft that you're picking, the more valuable those draft picks are. And so when you're reaching further for a player there, it's going to ding you worse than if you were reaching in the 6th round or the 7th round for a player, because those picks aren't worth much to begin with. So it's a tough look to be reaching based upon consensus on those two picks. Okay, before we get into the Denver Broncos, I just want to mention, you guys know that only 20% of you guys that are watching the show right now are actually subscribed to our channel. We just launched this channel less than a year ago. And if you want to help us grow, please consider subscribing with the button below to get more great content like this moving forward. All right, the Denver Broncos, Ryan, you also gave them a C grade, and they're bad in the metrics as well from a draft capital perspective. You have Jahdae Barron as the instant impact and the best value, but boy, did it feel like Sean Payton just drafted his guys here. He fell in love after Barron with multiple players, the running back, the receiver, and just went for it. I think I read some interviews after the draft about how he was scared that other people might be moving up to get those players or had looked at those players as well. And so he just massively overdrafted when we're talking about Harvey out of UCF and their wide receiver. What's his name?
Pat
yes,
Bryant
exactly.
from Illinois,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my issue with this class was partially about value, but it had a lot to do with the first round pick of Jahdae Barron, who I like. I think he's going to be a good nickel back for them. He's sort of like the nickel / safety type of player, a very physical cornerback, which is why you can kind of call him that like hybrid player in the nickel. But you just drafted Bo Nix in the first round last year. You've got mediocre offensive weapons around him. There were some players on the board who could have helped you. You could have considered trading up to do that as well. Why are you taking a nickel back when you needed to support Bo Nix? And we saw a lot of the teams who drafted quarterbacks last year and the Titans who drafted quarterback early this year really go after impact offensive weapons early in the draft, and the Broncos decided to draft a nickel back. Again, I like him. He's going to be good. It's sort of similar to the conversation we had about the Dolphins. I think he's a good player for that role, but it's a lesser role on your team when you really should be supporting on offense with Bo Nix. They did a little bit of that on day 2, obviously. You mentioned RJ Harvey and Pat Bryant. But again, RJ Harvey's a player that I'm not really high on. I have some questions about him. I have some questions about any running back who comes from a Gus Malzahn offense. It's a unique offense. It doesn't translate to the NFL very well. It's a very much of a spread offense. The running backs are running into light boxes. It's a great offense to play in if you're a running back in college and you want to put up some stats because you're going to have open running lanes. But then how does that translate to the league when now you're running into boxes with 7 or 8 defenders at a much higher rate, especially in an offense like the Broncos? You're not going to get spread out as much as you were in the Gus Malzahn offense. And then Pat Bryant, I hate to be critical of it because I was planning on him being one of my guys that I was going to hype up when he was a day 3 pick, but then the Broncos reached for him a little bit and take him in the 3rd round. So I don't hate the pick. The issue I have with that pick is that he's kind of similar skill set wise to Courtland Sutton, when it feels like this offense, what they could have used was a speedster to stretch the field a little bit, maybe to produce on screen passes and whatnot. And that's not Pat Bryant. He does a lot of the same things well that Courtland Sutton does well. So I don't think they transformed the offense enough going after with those 2nd and 3rd round picks as they could have, say, if they drafted someone like Matthew Golden in the 1st round or traded up for a Courtland Sutton or something like that.
Yeah, the only player that value shows them not reaching on is Jahdae Barron in the 1st round. Every other pick was a player who theoretically was viewed as a reach. Let's talk about the Detroit Lions next. You know, the Detroit Lions, you also gave them a C for their draft, and value doesn't like what they did as well, which isn't going to be that much of a surprise when you're talking about Isaac Tesla in the 3rd round. They did have a lot of 6th and 7th rounders that they quote unquote reached on. But as we know, I don't care as much about reaching on a 6th or 7th round player. But out of their, 7 players that they drafted, only one of the players was viewed as a steal, and that was Mike Frazier, not until the 5th round. So talk to us a little bit about the Detroit Lions draft class.
Yeah, the big issue I have here is Tyleik Williams in the 1st round, who it's maybe a slight reach. The value is not great, but it has to do with the position that you're addressing. This is sort of a long-term need, but in the short term, it's not even close to a need. You've got plenty of players on the defensive line who are going to contribute right away. You just re-signed Levi Onwuzurike. He's going to be backing up DJ Reader, potentially replacing DJ Reader as early as next season. But you also have Aleem McNeil there. That's a deep group of guys, and you don't need that. Now, if they were drafting, earlier, if they were a little bit further away from development and they wanted to plan ahead for when you're losing a veteran like DJ Reader next year, potentially, I could be more okay with that. But the Lions are right there knocking on the door of a Super Bowl. And they drafted someone in the 1st round who will not help them get there. Williams is just not going to have a meaningful impact on the roster in 2025. In the future, maybe. I'm not going to crucify them for taking it. The value's not terrible. But when you're this close and your fan base has waited this long, I really feel like you gotta take a bigger swing. This is a scenario where I'd be okay with a team reaching a little bit more to bring in someone at a more impact position, to fill a need at a very specific spot, someone that's going to help you get over the hump, or even just to take a position group, go get another weapon at wide receiver. It's not a need, but adding depth to that group could potentially help take you over the top. And Tyleik Williams doesn't do that. Tate Ratledge in the 2nd round offensive guard, he's the one player from this draft class who probably does help right away. He'll compete with Christian Mahogany for a starting job at guard. He'll have a decent chance to win it. But then Isaac Tesla, like you mentioned, in the 3rd round, they did eventually go get a wide receiver with him. But he's a developmental guy. He didn't get a lot of opportunities at Arkansas. Looked like a pretty interesting, bigger receiver who produces after the catch, almost a tight end hybrid. He's pretty big for a wide receiver, and the way he runs, maybe a little bit of a Brock Bowers-ish type in the way he's a bigger guy who produces after the catch. But again, it's not someone that's going to help right away. He's more of a developmental guy. So my issue is to be a Super Bowl contender and you only got one guy in Tate Ratledge who might win a starting job and help you right away. That's disappointing. Even if the draft class a few years from now looks okay, I want to see a Super Bowl a team that's knocking on the door of the Super Bowl to do something that's going to help them get over the hump.
Yeah, that's perfectly justifiable in my opinion. Don't disagree with you there. Let's talk about the next team up. That's the Tennessee Titans. And for me, this is a tough one because value also graded this team very poorly. You gave them a C. Value, this is the 32nd team in draft value. And they go out there and they make the obvious pick. It's a pick that they should make 100 out of 100 times, going after Cam Ward in the 1st round, at least based upon what we know right now. They need a quarterback. They go and get the most important position on the board. But after that, what really are they bringing to this team that's really going to stand out? Your view is their best value was Elika Minor. I also had, from the data value perspective, Minor is the best value as well. Your riskiest pick was Cam Ward, and your instant impact was Cam Ward. Before you get into the rest of their draft class, talk to us a little bit about some of your hesitations on Cam Ward, and then talk to us about this class as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, there was no number one overall quarterback in this draft class. We said it right from the very beginning, and the Titans kind of talked themselves into it eventually. But remember, early mock drafts often didn't even have them taking a quarterback because the thought was they're so far away from being competitive. You don't need to do it right now. Just take a great player like Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter and wait on the quarterback decision because you're going to be bad next year regardless. So, wait until a better draft class. There were also, lots of reports of, anonymous scouts and anonymous front office personnel saying, in last year's draft class, Cam Ward would have been like the 5th or 6th guy. It would have been somewhere in like the JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix range. So think of it like that. Like, look at what we saw from Bo Nix last year. It could work out. Like Bo Nix exceeded expectations and he had a good year, but even based on the year he had, like, would you really have felt great about taking him number 1 overall? Like, are you feeling like Bo Nix's trajectory is that like can't miss quarterback prospect? Even with a good rookie year, I'm not feeling like that. And so that's like best case scenario. Like that was a Bo Nix exceeding expectations last year. With Cam Ward, I mean, we've talked on the show a few times, so I won't get too into my issues with him, but he's a reckless player and you have to coach that out of him. So it's going to look bad next year. There's no path to him. I'd be stunned if he had like a Jaden Daniels type of rookie year. He might win offensive rookie of the year because there's probably no other quarterback seeing significant action, but he's not going to light the world on fire because he makes so many boneheaded mistakes, and it's going to take time to coach that out of him, just like what the Bills did with Josh Allen. That's the formula that you're hoping Cam Ward follows over the next couple of years, is that they can kind of ease him into it, slowly coach the bad mistakes out of him, and then kind of open up the offense a little bit, maybe in year 3. But it's a risk. It worked for the Bills and Josh Allen. It's a risk. It's not going to work out every time a team tries to do that. In fact, it usually doesn't work out.
So we're done with the D's. We're done with the C minus. We're done with the C's. You gave out 1 D, 1 C minus, 4 C's. Now we're into the C plus range, which is still below average, but C plus, we're moving on up. You've got the Arizona Cardinals here, though. And this is one I really want to ask you about because from a value perspective, they did really well. They hit Will Johnson. That was a great value pick. They hit a couple other players in the 3rd and 5th round that were value picks. They didn't really reach for that many players in the draft. And you, in fact, one of the picks that we show as a reach, you thought was the best value in Cody Simon in the 4th round. But yet you still rank the Arizona Cardinals as having just a C plus draft. Talk to us a little bit about why you think the Arizona Cardinals had a below average draft.
Yeah, I mean, they drafted 2 really talented players in the 1st and 2nd round, Walter Nolan and Will Johnson, but they're also 2 of the players that came with 2 of the biggest red flags in this draft class. Walter Nolan, there are questions about his maturity, about his effort and his commitment to being a professional football player. And with Will Johnson, he's coming off a pretty significant injury. That could be a home run for them in the 2nd round. But he was a player that at one point we were thinking was going to be a top 10 pick. So obviously I can't really judge a player's injury history. I don't know what it is. I'm not a team doc. Even if I had his, chart in front of me, I'm not a doctor to analyze it. But the fact that he slid, to midway through the 2nd round, it tells you a lot that everybody passed on him. A bunch of teams passed on him twice. So the injury history is a very real concern. And to take big risks with both of those early round picks, if you're wrong, everybody's getting fired. So they're betting their job on Walter Nolan and Will Johnson, and I'm grading them harshly because I would not be betting my job on a defensive tackle and a cornerback. They could help you a lot, but they're not going to change it. If you want to bet your job on someone, do what the Titans did. Bet your job on a quarterback. I can understand that, even if I disagree with it a little bit. But these guys are not going to, even if they hit, they're not going to drastically change the future of the Arizona Cardinals. So that was a huge risk to take. And I do like some of the players that they took later on. Like you mentioned, Cody Simon. I think he didn't test exceptionally well, but extremely productive. A lot of linebackers outperform their testing numbers because it's a position where, when you're in the middle of the defense, if you're a green dot type of player and you're playing at a very high level of intelligence, you can overcome lesser testing numbers, lesser traits, so to speak. And so I think Cody Simon, there's a pretty good chance he can be that type of player. So that's why I liked that pick a lot, even though some people were expecting him to fall after some poor testing numbers.
Now let's move over to the Green Bay Packers, who also earned a C plus in your grades. You listed their instant impact Matthew Golden, who's going to get run and is going to need to deliver early. We already know that, but we also have him listed as your riskiest pick. I show him as being the best value because pretty much every pick that they took aside from Matthew Golden technically was a reach. Now, I know you've got Baron Sorrell on the list here. He was the last guy in the green room. I couldn't believe that there was still a green room guy in there on day 3, but he emerged as like, oh my God, they still got a guy in there. So that was pretty crazy. But they reached on several offensive linemen, but they have a history of drafting offensive linemen well. So I'm wondering if just give them the benefit of the doubt in that regard. Talk to us a little bit about the Green Bay Packers draft class.
Yeah, I'll get to some of the later picks first real quickly. Anthony Belton in the second round. He was a little bit of a reach based on consensus, but I actually shared a few days before the draft. One of the players I thought was going to get drafted earlier than people are expecting was Belton. He's just one of those like big dudes on the offensive line. And I like those types of players because if you're just a big, massive dude that's taking up a lot of space, it's hard to fail because you're just taking up space. Like at worst, it's going to take people a half second longer to get around you. And that's the kind of guy that Belton is. That's why I like him. And I think that some NFL teams think that way as well. It reminds me a little bit of DeJuan Jones, who the Browns took. And it was considered a little bit of a reach possibly a couple of years ago. But he's ended up being serviceable for the Browns when he's had a chance to play. Baron Sorrell, I love that pick. He is a versatile, you could call him like a tweener. And I think that's why he fell a little bit, because he's like a defensive he's not big enough to be a defensive tackle, not fast enough to be an edge, but he plays both. And he produced at a high level as a pass rusher at both. The Packers love those types of players. It's a lesser version of Lucas Van Ness, who they drafted in the first round a couple of years ago. He's that type of versatile chess piece. So I love that he went to Green Bay because they know how to use that type of player. So I think that there's a pretty good chance he hits for them. Whereas if you mix him up with the wrong defensive coaching staff, it could fail because he could just be that player they don't know what to do with. Green Bay has proven they can use that versatile defender on the line. With Matthew Golden in the first round, the reason why I'm down on that, it's pretty simple. Go back and look at the history of 4.2 40 times in the first round of the draft. It's bust after bust after bust, especially when you look at the guys who also didn't really produce all that much in college. Matthew Golden was kind of just a guy at Houston for a couple of years. Flashes of it, but the effort probably wasn't always there. Then in Texas, you would think a first-round receiver in Texas with Quinn Ewers and all the talent around them would just light it up, but he was just kind of lost in the shuffle for most of the year. Then the playoffs, he turned it on, and he was a stud for them in the playoffs. He emerged as their number one receiver, but the speed, I think people fell in love with the speed and didn't really fully evaluate the lack of consistency and potentially a lack of effort during his college career, which raises a red flag.
Next up, Matt, if you want to bring up the value table here, we want to talk about the San Francisco 49ers, the other one. The San Francisco 49ers are 31st in the NFL from a value perspective. You have them as the last C+ on your board. This team consistently, for the last couple of years, has been terrible near the bottom of this value table, reaching on players in the middle rounds, players that you need to have impact for your team. This year it was Upton Stout, Nick Martin, and Jordan Watkins. You do list Jordan Watkins as your best value, although you list your riskiest pick as Nick Barton. Talk to us a little bit about this 49ers draft class and the job that John Lynch is doing here and trying to build his roster, because entering this draft, this was a sneaky, important draft for the 49ers. Yes, this was a team that has made the NFC Championship game, I want to say 3 out of the last 5 or 4 out of the last 5 years. They've obviously appeared in 2 Super Bowls. But after last season, and with the need to pay Brock Purdy and a lot of other high-priced players on their roster, they need to hit on a lot of these mid-round players to have some impact because they're cheap, and they need to have impact out of these guys that are cheap with the salaries that they're paying some of their other guys. What do you think of the 49ers this year?
Yeah, I think you could give them a worse grade than I did. I was a little bit more lenient for a couple of reasons. Number one, I like Mikael Williams a lot with their number 11 overall pick in the first round. I think he was a little bit undervalued because his production dropped a little bit this past year. He was playing through an injury for part of the season, but he was really critical to Georgia's defensive success. Even when he was out for a couple weeks early in the season, their defense looked vulnerable. And when he came back, even at less than 100%, drastically changed that defense. I think the Texas game was the first game where he came back. Remember, they abused Texas's offensive line in that matchup with 6 or 7 sacks or something like that. And I mean, Williams was probably playing at like 75% in that game, and he was still making a big impact. The previous year, he was a stud. I think that even though some people may have considered that a risk, I think that was too short-sighted looking at just his final year of production. I also actually do like Upton Stout, even another guy that I thought was going to be one of my guys on day three of the draft. Yeah. But he snuck into the third round. He caught my attention 2 years ago when Western Kentucky played against Ohio State, and he looked like he was one of the best defensive players on the field on either side. So I liked that pick. The issues I have, Alfred Collins is a nose tackle, and they took him in the second round. We already talked about that. There's no value in a nose tackle. Stop taking nose tackles in the first and second round. It's a waste of a pick to get a guy who's maybe going to play 15 to 20 snaps a game for you. Then Nick Martin, they may have overdrafted him by 3 or 4 full rounds. I would have not been at all surprised to hear his name called in the 6th and 7th round of the draft. And this is something that John Lynch does almost every single year. It's like his brain just like melts down in the 3rd round of the draft, and he panics and just throws a dart at his draft board and takes somebody. There have been a couple hits. He's had a couple successes in the 3rd round, but go back and look at the 49ers 3rd round draft picks over the last, 7-8 years that he's been there. And there are some brutal misses. I don't know what it is. He treats the 3rd round the way a lot of teams seem to treat like the 6th and 7th round, where you just go, you give the pick to a scout or something and be like, hey, who do you want? Like, let's take a chance on somebody. But he's doing it in the 3rd round. It makes no sense. The other reason that I was a little bit lenient was the volume of picks. 2 3rd round picks, 2 4th round picks, 2 5ths, 3 7ths. I don't like a lot of those picks, but we're wrong about day 3 picks all the time. So if you just get a bunch of them in the building, that's a better draft class than if you just took 6 or 7 guys.
Yeah, I believe the 49ers entered this draft with top 3 draft capital, which is something that they haven't had in a while. And so the combination of all that draft capital with the season that they just had, with the contracts that they were about to pay, made this draft so important for them. Just real quick on John Lynch, having those meltdowns, as you said, in the 3rd round, and the draft value shows that this is relatively consistent. You're noting in the 3rd round, we're seeing it in some of the other late rounds as well. What does this say about a GM who thinks he's kind of like the smartest guy in the room and willing to go so off track consistently later on? If he's right, then it's going to look absolutely outstanding, but he's, as you indicated, not right as often, and that's sort of putting them in this position that they're in.
Yeah, you're right. This is why they're in the position of needing to have a big draft this year, because they've had some misses, and so the roster is a little bit depleted. Even though there's still some stars on the roster, they haven't been replenishing that depth over the years. I would say that I don't have a problem with somebody who wants to go out on a limb a little bit. But if you're going to do it, the draft class needs to consistently look like it did this year, with a lot of players getting brought in to compete in training camp. Like, a lot of these guys, this entire rookie class won't make their roster, but at least you've got an opportunity to bring them in. You've got all summer to see them in training camp, let them compete for a job, and your odds of hitting on these reaches increases dramatically, because obviously everybody on day 3 is flawed. So if you want to take some chances on guys, get a bunch of them so that you're going to hit on a few of them. That hasn't been the case. Like you said, they've had some drafts where they have not had a lot of draft capital, and so they're still taking those chances. And that's what I have a much bigger issue with. In years past, I've given them worse grades, I believe, because they've done that with only like 6 picks. And that's a huge problem. Doing it this year with more picks, it's a little bit easier to justify, because you're at least sort of admitting that you're going to be wrong on some of these guys.
The Baltimore Ravens had the number 1 best value draft in the first 3 rounds, the number 4 best value in the first 5, the number 9 best value overall. But a large part of that was them going after Mike Green, who some guys had off their board entirely. It was sort of ironic for this team, I felt, in this draft, where they go and draft a kicker, which was the first time that they've ever done this in their history, because they know that there's issues with Justin Tucker, and yet they're going after a guy like Mike Green, who has similar spotty issues on his track record, just like Justin Tucker. So there's a little bit of irony in this whole thing to me. You list Mike Green as your best value and your riskiest pick for good reason. The instant impact of Malachi Starks is quite clear. He's a stud. Talk to us a little bit about the Ravens draft class.
Yeah, Malachi Starks was a very safe pick for them. It'll help them right away. He should win the free safety job. I don't love the pick, though. I was a little bit more down on him. Georgia sort of masked his lack of athleticism by playing a lot of too high safety coverages, which is slightly less common in college than it is in the pros. But Georgia did it, I believe, at the 8th highest rate in the country last year, which just, if you're playing too high safeties, your free safeties don't have to cover as much ground. Baltimore is not going to do that as often, because obviously one of their safeties is Kyle Hamilton, who you want to bring down into the box or bring down into the slot at times. So Malachi Starks is going to have more on his plate, and I think that there's a chance he doesn't live up to expectations if he's playing a lot of single high safety, because his lack of range in that deep secondary is going to be exposed. So my grade on them is partially counting for that. I don't love that first round pick as much, even though I do agree that it's a need, and should be a serviceable starter at least. The Mike Green is obviously a risk. I think even a generous reading of the multiple sexual assault allegations against him would say that he has a history of putting himself in bad situations off the field. That's a generous read of it, and that's obviously going to be a risk. If you've got a guy who's making poor choices off the field, that's, whatever types of choices those may be, it's going to put him at risk of being available to you in the future, right? And they're obviously dealing with that right now as we speak with Justin Tucker, which led them to have to draft a kicker. I also didn't necessarily love some of their other picks on day 3. I didn't see a lot of huge upside guys. It kind of felt like guys that are just going to plug in some depth here and there. So I also didn't see that great value on day 3 to boost them up a little bit to make up for some mildly questionable choices in the first 2 rounds.
So you gave them a B-. Real quick before we jump to the next team, wanted to ask you 30 seconds on Aeneas Peebles. He is the best value of their entire board based upon draft capital over expectation. He was expected to go at pick 132, goes at pick 210 instead. Any quick comment on Aeneas Peebles if you've scouted him at all?
Yeah, incredibly productive interior pass rusher, but probably too small. So I think that's why he fell, is that a lot of teams probably just didn't have him on their board at all, because they're going to cross off certain players who don't meet certain height, weight, speed thresholds. So he probably wasn't on a lot of boards. The Ravens decided to take a chance. Maybe it works out, but they'll have to sort of see if maybe they can get him to add weight, figure out how that works there.
All right, the Raiders are the next team. You gave them a B-. Everybody else is B or higher. The Raiders, they went to the FCS championship game, scouted it, decided they wanted to draft both of those quarterbacks. Now, they're both not going to play quarterback, but they're both on the roster. A very interesting draft, a lot of options and weapons, I think, that they obtained here. Obviously, Ashton Genty, first and foremost, he got to them at 6. We thought he might be drafted prior to that as the days leading into the draft went. Talk to us a little bit about the Las Vegas Raiders. You gave them a B-. What do you like or dislike about this class?
Yeah, I didn't want to be too harsh on them because I like Ashton Genty a lot. How can you not? And I like Jack Besh too. But are the Raiders close enough to being competitive that they should be drafting a running back in the top 10? Are they close enough to being competitive that they should be drafting a guy who really has no chance of being a number 1 receiver? He's going to be more of you're going to move him around and he'll be like a matchup kind of guy, especially when you already have a pretty similar weapon on your roster in Brock Bowers. Besh actually started his career as a tight end at LSU. He's slimmed down a little bit, but he does still sort of have that same play style as Bowers. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they move him around and use those two guys together. It should be fun, especially with Chip Kelly, a great play caller, finding ways to use them. But even though I like that and I'm excited to watch it, if I were a fan of the Raiders, I might be a little bit nervous about those choices because you're just not quite at the stage where those two positions are going to push you over the top more than likely.
All right, let's move on to the Philadelphia Eagles. They are a B grade for you, and they did a lot of great things in this NFL draft. They ranked number 3 through the first 3 rounds, number 7 through the first 5 rounds, and number 4 overall in draft value. Talk to us a little bit about what the Philadelphia Eagles did here, because they were hitting all over the place. You list your riskiest pick for them as Jihad Campbell that they drafted in the first round. You and I match from the model's perspective on Cameron Williams being their best value pick. We both have that one. Talk to us a little bit about how you feel Howie did this year.
Yeah, I think he did great. I mean, this was another draft where he just sort of consistently took good value throughout. There really wasn't anyone that I like absolutely loved, like Jihad Campbell at the end of the first round. I'm never going to praise anybody too much for drafting an off-ball linebacker in the first round, but the value there is decent. This was not a great class of first-round prospects, so I can't fault him for ending up with a guy that I would in a vacuum would rather take on day 2. At the 31st pick there, he'll eventually be a starter, potentially right away due to injuries. He might actually get, if he's healthy before Nakobe Dean is healthy, there's a chance that he's starting for them as a rookie. But other than that, he's probably more of a developmental guy that you're going to need to, he has the traits, but he probably needs a little bit of work. Andrew Makuba, I like him a lot. He's going to start. He'll have a chance to compete with Reed Blankenship, I think, for the free safety job right out of the gate. Ty Robinson, defensive tackles, developmental guy, but the 4th round, that's the spot to take him. Smail London, another Georgia guy in the 5th round. I'm not quite sure why he fell as far as he did. I thought there was a chance that he was a day 2 guy. Drew Kendall, kind of an odd spot to take him because he's probably a center-only prospect, but he has potential to start there. So if they're okay with keeping a center-only prospect on the bench to develop over a couple of years, he maybe is a future starter. And Cameron Williams, he was pretty bad at times this year for Texas, but the traits are off the charts. So to get him in the 6th round, I thought there was a chance someone would draft him just based on the traits as high as the 3rd round. So to get him in the 6th round, that's a great pick. Just there's a lot of picks throughout that I think are above average for the Eagles. So that even though there isn't like that one guy that I would point to and be like, this guy's going to be a star for them, they've got a lot of players that could potentially develop into that over time.
Yeah, it's a really nice balanced class by Howie once again. Are you guys excited about this rookie class, and are you getting ready for your rookie drafts? We have worked nonstop all weekend to rank this rookie class based on their team fits after the draft. Everybody is ranked, every key skill position player. You need to know how we believe these rookies are going to factor into the 2025 NFL season. With our rookie rankings and analysis, you'll be set to dominate your drafts. And guess what? We've got an exclusive offer for you, but you need to act fast. Use code SHOW5, that's SHOW 5, to take $5 off our fantasy football draft kit. In addition to these rookie rankings, the draft kit offers you seasonal rankings, projections, tiers, team previews, dynasty football rankings and tiers, and draft approaches. Is updated throughout the entire offseason, all the way up until the very last day before the start of the regular season. So go to sharp.football, click on our draft kit to get on board today. Use code SHOW5 to save $5 off the draft kit and see where we've ranked all of these rookies. We've done all the work for you. Put all the legwork in, hours and hours and hours. It's all ready for you guys. Just go over to sharp.football and check it out. All right, Ryan, let's move down to the Buffalo Bills. You list their instant impact as none. None. No player was an instant impact for them. And I understand why after having read your draft grades, which are up over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. You guys can go check those out if you want to get more information and analysis on these players. You list your riskiest pick as their first rounder, Maxwell Hairston. Talk to us a little bit about why you gave the Buffalo Bills a B, yet you say that they have no impact in their first round is risky. What do you like about this class? Because to me, that's a little bit negative there.
Yeah, this was a tough class for me to evaluate because I feel similarly to the way that I felt about the Lions. Like you're knocking on the door of a Super Bowl. You're trying to get over the hump and even just get to the Super Bowl. You should go out and get somebody who's going to help you right away and do that. And I don't think Buffalo did. There's a chance that Maxwell Harrison wins a starting job, but he's really more of a developmental prospect. I like his traits. If they took him on day 2, I would praise them for it. But taking him in round 1 sort of signifies that you think he's going to play right away and help you. And I'm just skeptical of it because he was not a shutdown corner in the SEC. He's sort of a backyard football type of player. He just wants to, he's got the athletic traits to just sort of stick to a receiver and he'll make some missteps along the way, but he's got the speed to recover from it. But that was getting him into trouble even in the SEC. And if you want him to do that in the playoffs in January, that's probably not going to go well as a rookie. So I'm questionable that that's going to be an impact player for them right out of the gates. I think it's more likely that he's on the bench and that you're going to have Tre'Davious White, who's obviously his career is, it's not as effective as it was when he was in Buffalo the first time, but at least he's a veteran out there you can trust to make fewer mistakes. The reason why I still give them a fairly high grade is I could see in September of 2026, 4 starters coming from this class. That's because Hairston, at some point, he's going to start. Obviously, you're going to force your first round pick to start at some point. And then they took TJ Sanders, a defensive tackle. He is the Ed Oliver type of defensive tackle for them. Deion Walker for Kentucky. He's the nose tackle, defensive tackle for them. And then Landon Jackson, the defensive end. I don't think any of them are going to start right away. Like I said, TJ Sanders, who you took in the second round, he's an Ed Oliver type. Ed Oliver's contract, though, the Bills might want to move on from it after this year because his cap hit goes up a bit. And so at least by adding TJ Sanders, they have the option to move on if they choose to do that. And then Deion Walker, he's the nose tackle. They've got Daquan Jones right now. They're probably moving on from that at the end of this year as well. Joey Bosa signed to a 1-year contract. They're probably moving on from him, in which case Landon Jackson steps into a starting role. So you've got those 3 defensive linemen, Maxwell Harrison, who could all be starting for them at the start of 2026, in which case at that point in time, we're going to say, wow, that's a great draft class. You get 4 starters with your first 4 picks. So I kind of settled on a B because on one hand, I love the fact that they might have 4 starters, but you're trying to get over the hump. Like, where's that one guy who's going to help you do it this year?
It makes a lot of sense. The Washington Commanders only had 5 picks this year, and I have them graded out with the 6th best value through the first 3 rounds. But after that, a couple of questionable selections and pushes them down just outside the top 10 in terms of overall value. Talk to us a little bit about the Commanders because you don't have them having anybody that's risky. You don't have anybody, though, that's having instant impact for them. You and I both align that their best value pick was Trey Amos. What do you like about the Commanders draft?
Yeah, I mean, I like Josh Connerly. That was good value, and he's probably not going to start right away for them, but he's going to be the left tackle of the future for Jaden Daniels. And so I like that they went out and they supported their first round quarterback pick from a year ago. Like, even if it's a guy that's not going to contribute right away, when you've got a young quarterback on the roster, you need to find ways to support him. And so I think it made sense to take him, even if he's not going to get on the field for you as a rookie. That's obviously going to be a need in the very near future. Trey Amos was just good value, and it fills a position of need. Maybe he competes for a starting job. I think he probably doesn't start for them right away, which is why I don't necessarily think he's an instant impact player, but a year from now, I think there's a good chance. The one quibble I would have with that pick is that he's a physical outside corner, which fits Dan Quinn. It fits what he wants in outside corner, which is why I do think he's going to start eventually. The bigger need they had in the short term was a guy who could play in the slot, in coverage in the slot. So they could have gone a different direction and gotten somebody to play that specific position. But again, it's a long-term need and it's a great value. I couldn't really give them a higher grade, even though I like both of those picks a lot, is that they only had 3 other picks on day 3, and I didn't even love the selections. I thought Jalen Lane, the receiver they took, although again, I like the fact that they're going after a skill position player to help their young quarterback. I thought that was a little bit of a reach in the 4th round. It probably doesn't pan out. Kane Medrano is the one interesting day 3 pick that they did have, though. A developmental pass rusher from UCLA. He sort of was playing like a hybrid pass rusher, off-ball linebacker role. He's not good in the off-ball linebacker role, but he is really explosive as a pass rusher. Probably doesn't see the field a whole lot as a rookie, but the traits are there to potentially turn into something. So they did get at least of those 3 day 3 picks, which isn't enough for a team that's still building. At least they did have one guy that you can get excited about for his developmental future.
The Chicago Bears are a team, speaking of developmental future with Caleb Williams, that they've just been doing everything they could this offseason to try to put him in a position to succeed with Ben Johnson, overhauling the offensive line. In this draft, in the 1st round, they find him a tight end to go to. In the 2nd round, they find him a slot receiver to go to in terms of Luther Burden. Just done with so much. But in this draft specifically, you have them as one of the teams, 8 of them have a B grade on the draft class. Talk to us a little bit about the Chicago Bears, and don't forget to slip in a little comment about Ruben Hippolyte, who was the worst value draft pick for them, the linebacker they drafted in the 4th round. Where did they come up with him, and did you see him as being a big of a reach as what the model is showing?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely thought he was a reach. He's just like a trait space linebacker. They fell in love with his speed, I assume. But that was a reach. I would have expected him to go a little bit later because the production maybe didn't necessarily match up with the traits that he showed. I just love the fact that they went out and got skill position players to support Caleb Williams. That's what they had to do. I don't necessarily love the choices that they made, which is why I didn't go out all the way out and give them like an A grade. I think taking Colson Loveland over Tyler Warren was a poor choice. Loveland's a developmental prospect at tight end. The traits are there, but it's not. He hasn't had a lot of experience. I mean, even when he was on the field for Michigan, that was not a prolific passing offense. So he's not had a whole lot of opportunities to really develop his route running technique and show what he can do in that area. Luther Burden on day 2. I like the skills. I think that the value was okay there. I do have a little bit of a concern just because like there were some questions raised throughout the process of, maybe the Missouri coaching staff didn't have the best things to say about his practice habits and his focus and whatnot. So you'd have to have a little bit of a concern for that in the back of your mind. It's tough for us to evaluate on the outside, but you never like hearing those reports out there, obviously. So there's definitely some questions with both of those picks, but I love the fact that that's the direction that they went with this draft, is supporting Caleb Williams.
The Los Angeles Chargers, obviously Harbaugh's there, second year in the offseason. This team was 19th in overall draft value. You gave them a B in overall draft grade. This is the team that went out and drafted Amarian Hampton. Talk to us a little bit about what you think the players that they selected bring to the team this year and beyond.
This was an interesting class for the Chargers because obviously you go out and you get a power running back in the first round, which fits Harbaugh. Hampton's more than just a power running back, but he does have the size and strength to pound the ball between the tackles, which we know Harbaugh likes to do. The question I have with that pick is, since we know the style of running that Harbaugh wants to do, the style of run game that he wants to run, did you really need to take someone in the first round? Could you have waited? You can find those powerful runners on day 2 in most years of the draft, and certainly in this year in a loaded class of running backs. But again, I can't question the value too much. Hampton was one of the better running backs in this class, and he'll start for them right away. Trey Harris, I thought, was a good value on day 2. They needed another receiver. I probably would have preferred they went out and gotten a speed receiver. I thought Matthew Golden was a possibility for them in the first round for that reason, that they could use some speed to stretch the field, whereas Harris, there's a little bit of an overlapping skill set with Quentin Johnston. So, it just doesn't like diversify the offense as much. You'd like to have different types of weapons out there. But I do like that they went out and got a wide receiver. I was concerned a little bit that they might not at all, just because we know Harbaugh likes to preach run game and defense. And so there was a little bit of a concern that they might target those positions more than they needed to. But this was a solid class led by those two guys. I also like Oronde Gadsden the second in the, 5th round where they grabbed him. He's that tight end. He's sort of the poor man's Colson Loveland of this class, a tight end / wide receiver. Maybe doesn't offer a ton as a blocker, but could develop into a weapon in the passing game for them as well. So it was a relatively well-rounded class for them.
All right, in case you're wondering, obviously Ryan's given you so much great analysis here. Ryan is also a massive contributor to the Sharp Football 2025 football preview book that's going to be coming out in just a month and a half or so. Don't forget to go over to pre-order your copy. Over 500 pages. Head over to sharp.football. It is the best and fastest way to get ready for the 2025 NFL season. You're going to be able to download it and get so much information and analysis before everybody else. It's going to help you bet your futures. It's going to help you draft fantasy football players. It's one of the best guides to the upcoming season. It has the lines and odds for every single game that's going to be played this year. It's an outstanding tool. Highly recommend it. So many people in this industry buy it, read it, and recommend it as well. So head on over to sharp.football and pick up your copy of the 2025 football preview book. And Ryan, obviously he's our expert, but he's also one of the best experts in the entire nation because, Ryan, I'm just looking right now. You nailed an 85 score on your big board. That means you hit 85 of the top 100 players that were going to be drafted. That is your best big board score that you've had since 2021. So the best of the last 4 years. And you are now the 7th most accurate big board in the entire nation. So kudos to you on that, my friend.
Thank
And
you.
we'll look now. We'll look now at the New Orleans Saints. We both like the fact that they could maybe go and draft an offensive lineman there in the first round, and they certainly did that, nailing Kelvin Banks Jr. And you have him as an instant impact player for this team. I show that Devin Neal was a great value pick for them that they ended up getting in the 6th round. Talk to us a little bit about just this overall class in general, and don't forget to touch on Devin Neal because I'm curious about where you see him fitting into this offense.
Yeah, this was a little bit of a tough evaluation for me because I don't like their day 2 picks, but I kind of like everything else about the class, starting with Kelvin Banks in the first round. They made a huge error a few years ago with Trevor Penning. He's just been a flat out bust, and they needed to replace him. Kelvin Banks will do that, whether he plays on the left side or wherever Taliesin Fuaga moves over to the right side. I'm not sure how they'll shuffle that line, but they've at least now got what should be 2 very good bookend tackles, and that will help Tyler Shuck, I guess, is going to be their starting quarterback. I don't understand why you would take Tyler Shuck that early in the 2nd round. Given his injury history, you're basically just going to use him as a pocket passer, and it's been quite a while since we've seen a pure pocket passer develop in the NFL. The quarterbacks that teams are drafting and developing these days are better athletes than Shuck, and you can at least move them around out of the pocket a little bit, have them run a little bit. At least early in their careers, you can do that with them. The pure pocket passer guys that we see around the league having success, like Stafford is really the prototypical guy right now. He's kind of grandfathered in. Like, he proved that he could do it, and so the league is going to stick with him until he can no longer do it. But the younger guys, yeah, Kirk Cousins is probably the other guy that's still doing it, but everybody else, at least when they enter the league, can move around a little bit. Jared Goff is maybe another guy who's producing as a pocket passer at this stage of his career, but when he entered the league, he could run a little bit. I don't think you're going to, even if Shuck can do it, I don't think you're going to ask him to because of his long injury history. So I really don't like that pick at all. Vernon Broughton in the 3rd round, I don't see a ton of upside for him. But then in the late 3rd round, they took Jonas Sanker, who I think could be a future starter at safety. 4th round, Danny Stutzman, who definitely has starter potential at linebacker. Quincy Riley, who I think was one of the steals, definitely the steal of the defensive backs on day 3. And then Devin Neal in the 6th round, who, the only reason he was there in the 6th round is because this running back class was so deep, somebody had to stay on the board until the 6th round. There weren't really 18 teams that were going to draft running backs in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round. Somebody had to slide a little bit farther. And so the Saints were patient, and they got a steal in the 6th round, who, again, maybe he's a future starter. So I don't like those 2nd, 3rd round picks at all, but I think Sanker, Stutzman, Riley, and Neal are all better than the 2 guys they got in the 2nd and 3rd round. But the fact that they ended up with them, kind of erases it. If this draft went Kelvin Banks 1st round, Sanker 2nd round, Stutzman 3rd round, and then Shuck and Broughton on day 3, I'd like this class a lot. So I kind of graded them based on that assumption. Like, yeah, I don't like the decisions that they made, but the class as a whole, it looks pretty strong.
So I'm really curious about the Minnesota Vikings. I'm wearing Minnesota purple, but it's not because I like this draft. The number one thing to me about this draft class is they didn't have a lot of capital heading in. The 2 teams immediately below them traded down to amass 1st-round picks the next year or other hauls. And Minnesota could have done something like that to try to help improve their position. But for whatever reason, I think that they felt like they really needed Donovan Jackson. They didn't want to lose him. There might have been a teardrop to the next set of offensive linemen. They wanted to leave this draft with an offensive lineman. I'm not sure, but they had to go and get him, which was a slight reach based upon the board. And then they reached on a bunch of their other players as well. And so they actually ranked 28th in overall draft value. And they didn't get a lot of picks in this draft. And in a draft that we knew had a lot of valuable picks in it. So, and the 2 teams right below them were able to amass more picks by trading down. So I rated this team pretty poorly from that perspective. You have them as having the last B on the board. Actually, no, there's one more team that's got a grade as a B after this one. So talk to us a little bit about the Minnesota Vikings draft class.
Yeah, I definitely understand the criticism because we definitely entered this draft thinking that they were going to trade down and try to add some more value to the draft class as a whole. I think what happened was they decided they really needed to address the offensive line because they're going to have JJ McCarthy starting, and they can't put him out there with the way the offensive line looked towards the end of last season. And this is a bad class of offensive linemen. It dried up very quickly to the point where we saw teams in the third round drafting players who are obvious career backups. They were just purely because they needed to bring somebody in. They were drafting guys who were really only hearing their name called because they're multi-position players. So the Vikings probably felt like they had to get an impact player. Donovan Jackson was one of the last guys who could potentially start right away and make an impact. And I like that pick. I think he's going to be a very solid starter for them. I assume he's going to play left guard next to Christian Darrisaw. And that's going to be an intimidating left side of the offensive line. It's going to help protect McCarthy, and they're going to be able to run behind those two guys. He helps in a big way. So that's why I still gave them a relatively high grade, despite the fact that they probably needed more depth, was that was a very clear position that needed to be addressed because you're going to have essentially a rookie quarterback out there next year in JJ McCarthy. The other picks in the draft, I don't feel like they were huge reaches. Ty Felton may be a little bit of a reach, the receiver from Maryland that they took in the third round, but he's an interesting prospect because he's a little bit older and he didn't really do much until the last season of his career. He was blocked by some good players earlier in his career, though, so you can kind of justify his late breakout in that way. I think there's a chance, especially in Minnesota, where like you're obviously not asking him to take on a lot of volume. You just need him to be a contributing third or fourth weapon, and I think he's capable of that. And some of the day three picks, Gavin Bartholomew, the tight end they took in the sixth round, is another guy who, again, you're obviously not asking him to be a starter, but I do think that he's the type of player who's relatively polished and come in and contribute in a smaller role right away.
All right, so the last team that you gave a B to was the New York Giants. And here I sort of disagree a little bit. I thought they did a little bit better than warranting just a B, but I want to hear your perspective on it. Naturally, I think based upon your write-up and analysis, it's in large part because they traded up for Jackson Dart, which was viewed as a desperate move to try to save their jobs, as you write. I felt like if you're going to go after a quarterback and you need to make a move like that, it's worth those resources to do, considering the quarterbacks that they've been working with over the last several years. And the fact that, like, if they went and picked Jackson Dart at number 3, we would be killing them for that, having passed over Abdul Carter and a lot of other players. So I felt like they got out of the first round not in bad shape. And then the rest of their picks, pretty solid value based upon the board, especially Cam Scadaboo, Darius Alexander. And then talk to me about Marcus Mbaugh, the offensive guard they drafted in the 5th round. He's viewed by the model as one of the very best in terms of overall value of this entire draft class. But I have them as the 3rd best value draft class in the first 5 rounds and the 5th best overall. Talk to us about the Giants draft class.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I like a lot of their picks, which is why I still gave them a B despite the Jackson Dart pick. Obviously, everybody loves Abdul Carter. He's going to be a stud. They now have a very deep pass rush unit. Darius Alexander is going to contribute to that. He probably plays a little bit on the interior defensive line, but he's also capable of lining up. Maybe on early downs, you could play him on the edge as well. Cam Scadaboo is going to be fun. He's probably going to be a little bit less of a pass catching weapon as he was at Arizona State, because obviously you've got Tyrone Tracy there, who is literally a former wide receiver who's very capable of playing that role. And then Marcus Mbaugh, like you said, he slid a little bit further. I have not seen a good explanation for why he fell. He was a potential 3rd round pick. He played right tackle mostly in college. He's got the ability to play guard as well. That versatility certainly bodes well for him, at least carving out a spot. When someone like that falls a little bit further and we don't necessarily hear an explanation, oftentimes it's an injury. That could be the explanation for it. I'm just guessing, though, because there really hasn't. It's been hard to connect the dots there as to why he stayed on the board. The reason why I can't go all the way and like give them a higher grade, though, is Jackson Dart. I will say on the positive side, you're right. They didn't draft him in the top 10, which we see teams sometimes get desperate enough to take that type of player in the top 10. The Giants, in fact, did it with Daniel Jones. They also didn't give up a ton. Like, it was a pretty reasonable trade. Fortunately, they had that pick at the early 2nd round that they were able to move up with and avoid giving up a future 1st round pick. So that's a positive as well. But ultimately, you drafted Jackson Dart, who's very unlikely to be the long-term answer. And the biggest issue I have with that and why it feels a little bit desperate is you're going to be bad next year. The Giants are not going to compete for a Super Bowl. Maybe they finish in the middle of the pack. Maybe they knock on the door of the playoffs, depending on how things play out with Russell Wilson. Maybe he's serviceable enough to get them to like 8-9 wins, but you're not going to be good. why not just enter next year still needing a quarterback? And it should be a good draft class for quarterbacks. There's at least 3 guys right now in next year's draft class that look like they're trending towards being solid prospects. And then there's other developmental guys who, maybe they take the leap in this year. Lenora Sellers from South Carolina is one of the guys I'm referring to that people are excited about. There's enough talent in next year's class that you don't need the number 1 pick to get a quarterback next year. So I would have just kicked that down the road because you've already solved it, the quarterback situation in the short term. You don't need Jackson Dart to come in right away, but because he's not going to play right away, it's going to be impossible to justify taking quarterback. What if they get the 5th pick in next year's draft and, someone like Cade Klubnik is there worthy of a top 10 pick? Are you going to take him? You're not, because you won't have seen enough of Jackson Dart to be able to make that choice. So that is why I downgraded their draft a lot, even though there are quite a few players that I mentioned I like from this class.
Some very valid points there. And to me, that just screams ownership needs to have more of a voice in some of what is going on here. If ownership was a little bit stronger in their voice, I'm talking about Mara into Brian Daboll, this team probably loses week 17 and is drafting Cam Ward. Now, you don't have as high of opinion of Cam Ward as maybe some other people do. So not a big loss to them to get Abdul Carter. And then, like you said, kick the can down the road. But if they maybe gave, hey, we'll give you 2 years to Daboll and Joe Shane, and that's the deal or agreement going into this, then they might have drafted a little bit differently. So I don't really know what's going on there with that front office, but coaches and GMs come and go. At the end of the day, ownership is who stands to gain the most if a team does really well, win Super Bowls. And I feel like that ownership has been relatively weak the last several years. Could have been a lot more authoritative or have a larger voice in deciding the direction of his franchise. He hasn't done that, and this is why the New York Giants are where they are. Let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks. This is a fun draft. As you mentioned, 3 impactful players there in the first 3 rounds. And then you add a little bit of fun with Jalen Milroe to the mix, a perfect pairing with Kubiak, who's going to be able to work with him, much like he worked with Taysom Hill there in New Orleans last year. Talk to us a little bit about the Seahawks draft.
Yeah, the Seahawks just added a ton of good players who are going to contribute and some really fun developmental players as well. Gray Zabel obviously probably starts right away. Nicky Manwari, I was making Cam Chancellor comps for him before the draft, so it's pretty cool that he ends up in Seattle. Obviously, they saw something similar there too. Elijah Arroyo, the tight end they got, is kind of more of a developmental guy. He kind of broke out last year with Cam Ward in Miami, but definitely has the traits to be an impact pass catcher. I wouldn't be shocked if at some point during his rookie year he emerges as their starting tight end. And then Jalen Milroe, I have very little confidence in Jalen Milroe turning into a long-term starting quarterback, but the upside is there for him to be a stud if it works out. And there seem to be lots of very positive reports about him as a person in terms of like the work ethic, the intelligence needed to make that happen. So it could happen. I like taking a chance on him in the 3rd round also, though, because worst case scenario, you decide, well, it's not working out at quarterback, but why not try him elsewhere? Like, he's an offensive weapon. He runs the ball like a running back. He's not just even the Lamar Jackson comparison doesn't quite work for me because Lamar Jackson kind of I feel like he runs more like a wide receiver almost. Like, he's not running people over. He's the speedy, elusive guy. Milroe is this really interesting mix of what he reminds me of is Chris Johnson, to use a throwback comparison a little bit. It's almost like the comp that I threw out before the draft was, imagine if Cardell Jones could run like Chris Johnson. That's kind of what you got. You don't necessarily have a very good quarterback. You've got some interesting traits, but not a good quarterback. But you've got Chris Johnson like running ability. So I imagine Seattle's going to use him right away, not at quarterback, but just putting him out there as an offensive weapon occasionally. And maybe he develops into something. But then I also like Seattle's draft because on day 3, just tons of interesting players. Riley Mills doesn't necessarily have the traits. The defensive tackle from Notre Dame, if you watch the playoffs, you know about Riley Mills. He got injured during the playoff run, but was impactful prior to that point. Torrey Horton, I think, has dealt with some injuries in his career, but has starter potential as a wide receiver. They got him in the 5th round. And then their final pick of the draft was Ricky White, who was a guy that I actually had in my way too early 1st round mock draft a year ago. another guy who's dealt with some
Oh, wow.
injuries throughout the course of his career. This past year just didn't quite go well for him, but a really interesting developmental prospect for them. I think they've got some really nice weapons on day 3 of the draft to sort of work them in, and maybe they turn into something. And again, this is a big class. I believe they had 11 picks. I'm always going to bump those types of draft classes up a little bit just because of the volume greatly increases the chances that some of these guys pan out.
Yeah, I'm no elite talent evaluator like you are, but I actually had the Seahawks a little bit higher than even the B+ that you gave them. Real quick, 30 seconds on Damian Martinez there in the 7th round. He's viewed as one of the best draft steals in the entire 2025 NFL draft.
Yeah, he's another one of the running backs that somebody had to fall down a little bit. I think that one of the reasons why he got pushed down a little bit was he's not necessarily a dynamic weapon. He's going to be an early down running back type of guy. And so that's easier to find. Those guys are available every year, but certainly talented. In a different draft class without this much depth, he's going in the 4th round range probably.
Okay, so I really like the Seattle Seahawks draft as well. Now let's move on to another B+. You gave the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who I showed have the 7th best overall draft value. They landed Emeka Egbuka in the 1st round. Instant impact is how you graded them. Interestingly, you say that their best value pick was Benjamin Morrison, the cornerback, and he's also the riskiest pick for them. Talk to us a little bit about this draft class and Morrison.
Yeah, Morrison's risky because of the injury history. He was a potential 1st round pick before he got injured this past year. And then that kind of wiped that out. And it became clear that he was going to be on a day 2 pick just because no one wanted to quite gamble on him coming off of an injury. But it's a definite need. And if he's healthy, it's a great value. So I love that pick because it pairs one of their biggest needs with a good value player. I also really like the Emeka Egbuka pick in the 1st round. I think that it clearly wasn't their biggest need, but they're in this spot right now with Baker Mayfield at quarterback where they're not quite a Super Bowl contender. He's definitely not the type of quarterback that's going to put everybody around him on his back and carry them to a Super Bowl title. But especially in the NFC, maybe you can get there if you surround him with a ton of talent. And right now you've got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. If they stay healthy and you add Emeka Egbuka to the mix, who was the most NFL ready of the wide receiver prospects in this class, if everybody's healthy, that's potentially an elite wide receiver unit and the type of unit that could take a player like Baker Mayfield, who's good but not great, and maybe make his play good enough to actually carry you pretty far in the NFC. So I really like the strategy they had with Egbuka in the 1st round, and then following it up, obviously, with Benjamin Morrison and then Jacob Parrish in the 3rd round, another cornerback. They addressed their biggest need, which is probably cornerback, on day 2 sufficiently to justify going for a maybe more of a luxury pick in the 1st round, but one that could be something that takes you over the hump.
Yeah, I thought that this was a great draft by them as well. Very interesting draft. Let's move over to the Dallas Cowboys. We have Dallas Cowboys go with a guard in the 1st round, Tyler Booker. And that surprised a lot of people, going with an interior offensive lineman with so many other needs and so many other players on the board. They come back and go with Jaden Blue, who was the pick that you said was the best value. My model said that the best value was Siobhan Ravel Jr., the cornerback. You list him as the riskiest pick. Talk to us a little bit about him as well as your overall thoughts of the Dallas Cowboys, which you gave a B+.
Yeah, Tyler Book in the 1st round is a pick that I don't hate, but I'm just sort of disappointed by. The Cowboys over the years have been a team over the last decade or so that has done pretty well in the draft. It hasn't quite all come together to make them a contender, but their 1st round picks are consistently hitting on because they tend to take a best available player approach. That's kind of what they did here with Tyler Booker. I'd be really shocked if he's a bust. He's probably going to be a starter, especially for Dallas, which has done a really nice job drafting and developing offensive linemen. I'm sure they'll make it work with him, but I don't see a huge upside with him. And you had someone like Tyler Warren sitting there who you obviously could have justified as best available player. Even though tight end wasn't a great need, you could certainly say, hey, even if we didn't need a tight end, we did need more playmakers on the offense, and he was the best available player. It would have been real easy to justify that pick. So downgrading their draft class a little bit just because I was disappointed with that choice. But then Donovan Ezeraku in the 2nd round as a pass rusher, really good value there. Siobhan Ravel Jr., a guy who at one point was probably going to be a 1st round pick until he had an ACL tear, which ended his season. I'm a little bit more concerned about him after the draft, seeing how far he fell, because we've already talked about a couple other guys, Will Johnson and Benjamin Morrison, who had injury concerns at cornerback, who ended up going in the second round. Ravel falls all the way to the third round, and he was maybe even more of a first-round lock prior to injury than Benjamin Morrison was, and yet we see how far he fell. So that makes me wonder what team doctors were saying about him to lead him to fall that far. But if it pans out, it's a great value because the talent there. And then Jadon Blue, who to get him in the fifth round, he's another running back that in a normal draft class here, there's just no way he's on the board in the fifth round. I think he's, in a vacuum, probably like a third round pick, maybe even a second round pick. I think he has a very good chance to play a critical role for the Cowboys in the backfield this year. And if Tyler Booker helps out, if he's an impact player right away, that could be a very good run blocking offensive line if everybody stays healthy and if Booker contributes. So Jadon Blue is kind of a sneaky bet to have a pretty good rookie year.
Yeah, in one way, this Cowboys draft doesn't make a lot of sense because who do they have outside of CeeDee Lamb? That wide receiver room is terrible, so what are they doing? But in another world, it makes a lot of sense based upon what the Cowboys have historically been, which is that let's build through the trenches, a solid offensive line. Let's try to run the football, especially when you bring in a head coach like Brian Schottenheimer. So interesting dynamic going on there down in Dallas. Let's move a little bit to the dirty south, to the Atlanta Falcons. And this was an interesting draft, Ryan, because they didn't have a lot of players. They traded to move up a little bit, so they lost a little bit of value. But every single player that they picked based upon the draft capital over expectation value was not a reach at all. They had zero reaches in this draft. I know that you said the riskiest pick is James Pierce Jr., who is the pick that was basically picked as close to expectation as any of the others. Talk to us a little bit about this Atlanta Falcons draft class. You gave them a B+, right smack dab amongst, six other teams that got a B+, but not as many picks available to them.
Yeah, I mean, they needed to upgrade the defensive line. They needed to develop a pass rush, and so they go out and spent 2 first-round picks on that pass rush in Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. There's a chance this really transforms the defense, and if both those guys hit right out of the gate, which they could, especially working together, they obviously help each other to have 2 weapons on the defensive line together, as opposed defenses can't just key on Jalen Walker if he were the only guy they came away with. You've got to account for both of those dangerous pass rushers. It potentially gives them a chance to win that division, right? Like I think they were justified in giving up a future first round pick to go and get James Pierce and sort of, push that first round pick into this year. I don't really have a problem with that trade. Sometimes I'm critical of teams giving up future first round picks. In this case, the way that the trade worked out was they really just spent last year's first round pick this year. It's not like they gave up an extra first round pick. Like when the Jaguars case moving up, they were spending multiple first round picks on Travis Hunter. In this case, they only spent 1 first-round pick on James Pierce. They just used next year's first-round pick now, given where they are in the development of that roster and where that division looks and where the NFC looks as a whole. If Michael Penix Jr. takes another step and these 2 players fix your pass rush, suddenly you're in the thick of things, and that definitely in that division and maybe in the NFC as a whole. And then some of their day 3 picks, worked out as well. They also needed to address the secondary, and they went out and got Xavier Watts, who I think has a great chance to start right away. And then Billy Bowman, another safety from Oklahoma, who I'm not as high on, but again, it's a position of need, and you got 2 guys going out there to compete for playing time. The odds that at least one of them steps in and contributes right away at a position of need is pretty high.
The Houston Texans had one of the weirdest drafts, in my opinion. If drafting a guy named Jalen allowed you to get the best draft grade of the entire board, this team would have beyond an A+, because they drafted 3 players named Jalen plus a player named Jaden. And I really love Jaden Higgins, the wide receiver that they got out of Iowa State. Then they come back and take his teammate Jalen Knoll and 2 other Jalens later on in the draft. Talk to us a little bit about the Houston Texans draft class. You gave them a B+.
Yeah, one of the themes that we've been talking about today is teams supporting young quarterbacks, and that's exactly what the Texans did. Jaden Higgins with their first pick, Ariante Ursary, a future left tackle, possibly their left tackle right away as a rookie. Jalen Noel in the 3rd round, Higgins' teammate at Iowa State. Right out of the gate, 3 picks right there. They're going to help CJ Stroud, which I think was especially important given how the offense took a little bit of a step back in year 2 for Stroud. This, I think, gives him the offensive line support that he needs to have the protection, better weapons at wide receiver to help him take that growth. You needed to do that. And then even some of their other picks, they added Woody Marks, who's probably going to factor in. They took him a little. There were some running backs on the board that I would have taken before Marks, but he's a capable pass catcher, so he's also going to factor in, potentially helping Stroud. I didn't love their third round pick of Jalen Smith, one of the other Jalen's that they took. I thought that was a reach for them. So that's why I'm not giving their grade a little bit higher. That was still a spot where I think you could have gotten a more impact player, and they kind of reached for a guy who's more of a developmental cornerback. But, I love the approach of this draft as a whole. All of these teams that are going out and supporting young quarterbacks, I fully sign off on that.
All right, talk to me about the New England Patriots. You gave them a B+. I'm really excited about this draft class. I think it was a great draft class, even though the draft value doesn't indicate it as much. They're 9th overall in value draft rounds 1 through 5. So it depletes a little bit the last day. Obviously, he drafted a kicker and he drafted an offensive tackle in round 7, who some people viewed as a little bit of a reach as well. So that's going to knock their overall ranking down. But I have them as the 9th best through the first 5 rounds. And they've got a lot of impactful players. And to your point in your write-up and your analysis, they had 11 overall picks here. So they got a lot of talent that they could replenish. Some people didn't really get Travion Henderson with Ramondre Stevenson already on the roster, but Travion Henderson did not have a single fumble in college. Ramondre Stevenson was dealing with a lot of fumble issues. It impacted his playing time late in the 2024 NFL season. So I thought that was a great pick as well. You know more about Travion even than I do, being the Ohio State fan that you are. So talk to us a little bit about this New England Patriots draft. I have them better than a B+. Am I wrong? Is there a lot of reason to be optimistic about this draft class?
Yeah, I think a lot of people graded them higher than a B+. So obviously I like the class. I mean, a B+ is a pretty good grade. And I tend to be a harsher grader than some, so that's part of it. The reason why I'm not going to go all the way and give them an A- or an A is because Will Campbell at number 4, it's not necessarily a bad pick, but this was a bad draft class. Will Campbell is not a 4th overall left tackle in a vacuum. In fact, if Josh Simmons didn't get injured earlier in the year, I think there's a pretty good chance Josh Simmons would have been the first tackle off the board and Campbell would have slid down a little bit. What happened was they were unable to address the left tackle position in free agency. And so they had no choice. They could not enter the year with the offensive line looking the way that it did with Drake May entering year 2. So they absolutely had to take Will Campbell. They had no other option. Armand Membu was mentioned as a guy that maybe they could consider. Some people really like his upside. He's never played left tackle before in high school or college. So I don't think he was ever a serious consideration for the Patriots, even if they like his developmental upside, because you absolutely had to get a left tackle who could play right away. So you had no choice but to take Will Campbell. When the move they should have made, given the state of the roster, they're not close to being competitive. They should have traded down. They should have tried to move out of that spot, acquire extra picks, be it this year or next year, to continue giving you more opportunities to replenish this roster, because they are in a pretty bad spot overall, but they had no choice but to take a left tackle. So I'm downgrading them that just from the overall team building situation that they put themselves in by forcing themselves to take a left tackle in that spot and having to reach a little bit to do so. Campbell, like I said, he's not a slam dunk franchise left tackle. He just happened to be the best option available to them in a pretty bad class of offensive linemen. Now, the rest of that class, I love. Travion Henderson is a no doubt about it upgrade for them. Ramondre Stevenson will still play a role. Antonio Gibson probably still plays a role because those guys can handle some early down carries, but Henderson is a huge upgrade for them on passing down. He's a legitimate weapon in the passing game. Kyle Williams, I thought that was maybe a little bit of a reach. He's sort of like the underneath deep threat type of receiver. He'll contribute because he has the speed to do so. Jared Wilson is going to have a chance to compete for a starting job. He's probably a center only prospect, so maybe he doesn't start right away, but that job probably comes open next year. On day 3, they got 2 guys, Joshua Farmer and Braden Swinson for the defensive line, who I thought easily could have been day 2 picks. So again, I'm being critical of the Campbell pick, but as a whole, they added a bunch of impact players in this draft class. So I do still really like this class. I'm just a little critical of the process that led them to Will Campbell.
Okay. The Kansas City Chiefs always seem to play in the Super Bowl, and now they get another A- draft class from you. A lot of things to like here. The key, I think, hinges around Josh Simmons and his health. But you have the best value being running back Brashard Smith. Talk to us a little bit about the Kansas City Chiefs draft class.
Yeah, the Josh Simmons pick was a no-brainer for the Chiefs because, like I said, if he were fully healthy, I don't think there's any chance he's on the board for them. And the Chiefs have no intention of drafting higher than, maybe like 28th at any point in the near future. Picking to like 27th or 28th is going to be a disappointing year for them. So when you have someone like Josh Simmons fall to you, even if it is because of injury, it makes sense to take that risk because you just don't get an opportunity to draft that type of player often when Patrick Mahomes is your quarterback. So that was a no-brainer. And it also was a need. Like, they need to upgrade the offensive line. Even if he's not ready to play right away, I don't think it matters to the Chiefs because you just don't get the opportunity to draft a premium talent very often. I really like Brashard Smith, who was the final pick of their draft. He's a former wide receiver who converted to running back. He was awesome for SMU, played a huge role in getting them to the playoffs. Just last year, we saw the Giants do this with Tyrone Tracy, and he was a guy that I was very high on, who slid a little bit further than I thought he should have, ended up contributing right away, and might be their starting running back week 1 this year. Smith has a chance to do that. Like, there's a lot of guys in the Kansas City backfield, but nobody is really having a stranglehold on playing time there. So, especially in a pass-heavy offense where, if he emerges as a legitimate weapon in the passing game, I'm sure Patrick Mahomes is going to love that and advocate for him getting on the field more. So, as a 7th-round pick, he stands out as a guy in this draft class who could have a big impact. The one negative I would say about this draft class is their 2nd-round pick, Omar Norman Lott from Tennessee. When he was on the field, he was one of the best interior pass rushers in the country. The problem was he wasn't on the field. I believe he averaged 17 snaps per game. That was a good Tennessee defense, but he wasn't blocked by superstars. Very weird to me that he wasn't on the field more. I don't really know what the reason was, but at best, you're getting a guy who's just inexperienced and a developmental prospect. So that's a little bit of a risk, but again, a team like the Chiefs is the type of team that should be taking risks. So I don't hate the pick.
Now, the Los Angeles Rams, I have them ranked only 20th in my draft value, but that does not account for the pick that they traded away so that they could get an extra pick next year, which is extremely valuable. So this is just average per pick taken. So they bank that. Not a great value draft, but I also, like you, think that this was a pretty decent draft overall. You gave them an A-. Talk to us a little bit about what you like for the Rams this year.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they didn't spend a 1st-round pick, I mean, that they're not really getting anybody who's locked in to be an impact player and a superstar for them. But I love that they traded out with the 1st round in a bad draft class. They could have stayed. They could have justified taking the same risk that the Chiefs did with Josh Simmons and maybe making him your left tackle in the future. They could have done that. But next year's draft class, it's in the early stages, looks a lot stronger. I think it totally makes sense to take advantage of that opportunity to pick up an extra 1st-round pick from the Falcons and move back, get that extra pick for next year. And then they followed that up with a bunch of really just smart, safe picks. Terrence Ferguson in the 2nd round is going to be an impact tight end. I think he pushes Tyler Higbee for playing time right out of the gate. Josiah Stewart, I think, is an underrated pass rusher who has the potential to contribute. It's going to be hard for him to get on the field because they've got some impact pass rushers already, but just sticking and picking and drafting the best available player on the board is a legitimate strategy, especially in the 3rd round. Who knows? Someone might get injured and you're going to need him to contribute, and he's capable of it. I like Jarquez Hunter a lot. He is kind of an early down running back, really physical runner. He'll definitely have an opportunity to contribute, especially if they choose not to pay Kyron Williams in the future. Maybe he emerges as a starter who fills in for them. Ty Hamilton, Chris Paul, 2 guys on defense who are going to, rotate in, who I thought both of those guys had the potential to sneak into day 3. They ended up getting them all the way in round 5. Just no one in this class that you can point to and say, like, yeah, this is going to change the franchise. But almost every pick going through, you can say, yeah, they got pretty decent value there. That's somebody who's going to contribute.
All right, the New York Jets. This is a team that a tale of 2 days, in my opinion. The first couple of days, solid. Actually, they have the 5th best draft value in the first 3 rounds of the draft on Thursday and Friday. Walk away with multiple starters. Then you go to Saturday, and this team reaches for several of these players. I don't know if you're going to agree on some of the reaches on Saturday, but overall, what do you make of the New York Jets draft? You gave them an A-. You like their draft. They did hit on some of those early picks, which I care more about, trying to get good players there than taking some reaches later on, which is what they ended up doing.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I care a lot more about hitting on your first, second, and third round picks. If you take some reaches on day 3, I can easily forgive that. Armand Membu made perfect sense for them in the first round. I also love seeing him land there where he can play right tackle. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Patriots, how he's never played left tackle. So I'm going to a franchise where he can be plugged in at right tackle. Olu Fashanu and Armand Membu, hopefully you've got your 2 bookend tackles for a long time there. I also, this is another team where even though they didn't just draft Justin Fields and he's bounced around to a few teams, he's still pretty young. He's only a little bit older than Tyler Shuck, who the Saints are investing in. And the Jets seem to take a similar approach to investing in their young quarterback by going and getting him a starting tackle in the first round, getting him Mason Taylor, a tight end who's going to contribute right away, very well-rounded tight end who's going to could potentially be a security blanket type of weapon in the passing game for them. Getting Arian Smith in the 4th round, who I think was a reach, but they added some more speed to the offense, and they'll find ways to try to be creative and get him involved. Their 3rd round pick, their first defensive player, Azaria Thomas from Florida State, I was really high on him. He fell to the 3rd round because he didn't test very well, but he's a ball hawk in the secondary. I think someone like Aaron Glenn is going to find ways to make him find ways to get him to contribute, even if it is eventually a shift to safety. His ball hawk skills are going to be valuable in their secondary at some point. So I think the Jets crushed those first 3 picks, and I love that 2 of them were guys that are going to help Justin Fields.
All right, getting another A- were the Indianapolis Colts. I like the Jets draft personally more than I like the Colts draft. Tyler Warren fell into their lap, and they had no choice but to take him. I think that staff had to have been overjoyed to not have to move up to draft Tyler Warren, because there were some rumors that they might have been interested in doing that, or some people were linking that. That didn't need to happen. He's there at 14. You like this draft class a lot. What do you like about this class?
Yeah, well, Tyler Warren is a big part of it. Get a guy like that to just fall into your lap and contribute right away at a position of need. They maybe have 1 foot out the door with Anthony Richardson, but they shouldn't. Like, they drafted him knowing this was going to be a multi-year developmental project. So I hope that they're still invested in him. Hopefully the Tyler Warren pick is a sign that they are. So getting him another weapon to allow him to continue that development makes a lot of sense. And I think Warren is the perfect player for that, because he's a guy that proved at Penn State, where they had absolutely no weapons at wide receiver. Everybody knew they were trying to get the ball to Tyler Warren on every single play, and yet somehow he still was able to get open. Even though he doesn't have crazy athletic traits, he's not the type of guy that you would think can just run away from players. But yet he somehow found ways to do it, especially going up against zone defenses. He proved that he's just that type of guy who just has that spatial awareness in the middle of the field, where he's always going to find a way to present himself to the quarterback. And that's what Anthony Richardson needs so badly, I think. He's got some good weapons. Michael Pittman is a good contributor. He's got a decent slot receiver in Josh Downs. Alec Pierce can stretch the field. Now he's got that guy who's just always going to find a way to get open. And I think he's going to give Anthony Richardson the best chance. If there's any hope of him still developing, I think that this is a perfect weapon for him. Their 2nd round pick, JT Tuimoloau, just a great value, kind of the Tyler Warren of the defensive side of the ball. The traits aren't spectacular, and yet the production was undeniable. He was a weapon from the time he set foot on the field at Ohio State, played a huge role in getting them to the national championship last year. Justin Wally in the 3rd round is why I wouldn't grade them a little bit higher, because he's a little bit of a reach, but he's a guy who's got a lot of experience, really productive, a bit of a ball hawk himself, like I was talking about with Azaria Thomas with the Jets pick. Sort of falls into that similar range of like a guy who maybe doesn't have elite traits, but just really productive. So I think that he's another guy who's going to be able to contribute right away and maybe surprise some people who didn't love him because the traits weren't necessarily there, but the production was.
Just so you guys know, we have now reached the part where we are dealing out grades that start and end with the letter A. There's 3 A's left, 3 teams left on the board. Before we do that, I just want to mention, make sure that you're subscribing to our channel. We have got plenty of more draft-related content coming out over the course of the next week. Put so much draft content analyzing the prospects. Now we're going to analyze more of the class-by-class information. So make sure that you're subscribing. Hit that subscribe button at the bottom. Let's talk about the Carolina Panthers, Ryan. The Carolina Panthers are an extremely exciting draft class. You gave them an A, and for good reason. Talk to us a little bit about what you liked about this Carolina Panthers draft class. Of course, you get Tet, Of course, he's going to help a young quarterback develop. He's a red zone threat. He's going to be a lot of fun for this team. They've been making a lot of moves with some of their post-draft signings as well. This is a team that's looking to get better, and they're trying to bring on a lot of players to help them do that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, another team helping a young quarterback, obviously, with Ted McMillan. So obviously, we've talked about that thought process with other teams. I obviously love that. Then getting Nick Skirton and Princely Umanmielen in the second and third round, 2 edge rushers. That was obviously probably their biggest position of need. Wide receiver was a need just because you needed to develop Bryce Young. But, in a vacuum, you would certainly say the pass rush was their biggest weakness last year. And now you got 2 guys who are ready to come in and contribute right away. Skirton was a player that I was really high on. He was so dominant at Purdue 2 years ago. His production dropped off last year at Texas A&M, where they asked him to add a lot of weight, and he just wasn't able to be that dominant edge rusher. Hopefully, Carolina has him drop weight, play at that, be a little bit more explosive off the edge. They also added some really good players on day 3. I think Trevor Etienne is going to be a factor in the backfield for them. Lathan Ransom was a stud at Ohio State. So he's that big safety that steps up and can defend the run. They had a good tight end in Mitchell Evans in the 5th round. Again, not like a dynamic weapon, but somebody who could certainly, at worst, be a good number 2 who sort of contributes as both a blocker and an occasional pass catcher. Just a really solid class throughout, and certainly elevated, in my opinion, because of the fact that they did what a lot of people didn't expect them to do, and that was support Bryce Young with that first pick.
All right, now here's one I'm excited to talk about, not because it's the Pittsburgh Steelers, but because so many people actually think that this is an average draft. I looked at some of the industry averages, and I'm probably going to have to do another video of my reactions to some of the industry mock draft grades. But the industry as a whole gave the Pittsburgh Steelers an average 16th best grade in the NFL draft. You gave them one of your 3 A's. And I think one of the things that's not being factored into this, Ryan, is the fact that they passed over the trap of drafting Shedeur Sanders there at 21. So many people were thinking, hey, the Steelers might be interested in drafting Shedeur Sanders. And whether you believe that they've got some sort of a handshake agreement with Aaron Rodgers or not, that he is going to play with them, you never know if Aaron Rodgers, he could change his mind on a whim. So there's no real telling for certain what Aaron Rodgers is going to do here. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, desperate as they might have been for a quarterback, decided to pass at 21, and then everybody just kept passing Shedeur Sanders down the line. So it ended up making the Pittsburgh Steelers look so intelligent by not taking him there at 21, and they went with a very strong position of need, who they had been linked to a lot, and went out and got Derek Harmon, and of course, I show, based on the values, Caleb Johnson being a value, Jack Sawyer being a value, and then Will Howard there in the 6th round being a value pick. Talk to us a little bit about the Steelers draft and why you gave them one of the 3 A's that you dished out.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they didn't draft a quarterback, and that's factoring in here. They avoided that trap, like you said. Obviously, most of us expected them to take Shedeur Sanders in the 1st round, or at least take someone on day 2, so be it Sanders or Shuck or Milrow or somebody. And they, I think, smartly said, this is just not a very good quarterback class. Even if we don't have a quarterback right now, we don't need to reach to get a bad quarterback. And a lot of teams made the mistake of being desperate and taking a quarterback in this class, where probably no one in this class, if none of these quarterbacks, Cam Ward included, turned out to be a long-term high-level starter, I wouldn't be surprised. This just wasn't a good class. I give the Steelers credit for just acknowledging that even though we need a quarterback, this just isn't the year to do it. I also give them credit for then acknowledging in the 6th round that, you know what, Will Howard shouldn't be on the board here anymore. So let's go take a flyer on him. Maybe he plays for us. Maybe he doesn't. If Rodgers doesn't show up this year, I think he probably will. And, there's a chance Will Howard develops. I think I actually liked him more than some of the players who went off the board earlier than him, including Tyler Shuck, who went off the board a lot higher than him. The players they did take early in the draft, though, are guys that are good values, fit the Steelers so well. They are one of these teams that just knows how to draft for their specific needs. Derek Harmon, the perfect comp for him is Cam Hayward. So for him to go in there where he's going to get to play with Cam Hayward and eventually replace Cam Hayward is perfect. The odds of him being successful landing in Pittsburgh are through the roof. He now, in hindsight, looks like one of the safest picks in the draft just because of where he landed, because they know exactly what to do with that type of player. Caleb Johnson, like you said, I wasn't as high on Caleb Johnson as some people, but again, in hindsight, I now see him landing in Pittsburgh. He's a Steelers running back. That fits perfectly for what they want to do. He's that power runner who's got enough juice to be valuable, and he'll break off some long runs. Jack Sawyer in the 4th round, love that pick. A guy who maybe doesn't have elite traits, but has just always been productive. The Steelers know how to take players like that and put them in a position to be successful. So those are 3 guys right off the bat that are probably starters. Y.A. Black in the 5th round. He's a nose tackle. We've talked about that. I don't like teams drafting nose tackles early, but in the 5th round, that's the perfect spot to draft a nose tackle. And the Steelers defense does employ a nose tackle on early downs. So he could be a guy who is a quote unquote starter for them, even though it's, like Mike Tomlin said, it's not a position that holds a lot of value anymore. But in the 5th round, you get a guy who is going to come in and contribute. The value is right at that spot of the draft. So this was just a great draft for the Steelers all the way through, getting good value at positions of need and avoiding the trap of going for that early quarterback.
Completely agree. And that leaves just one team. And you have also given the Cleveland Browns an A. They are the team that end up with drafting Shedeur Sanders in the 5th round, obviously after one of the biggest slides we have ever seen in modern eras that we've been tracking draft value and players sliding down the board. But let's talk a little bit about this Cleveland Browns draft class, Shedeur plus beyond Shedeur Sanders. Through the first 3 rounds from a value perspective, I show them as just ranking 22nd in value. And then Shedeur certainly boosts that up late in the round. But there's a lot that you liked about this class, including the fact that you think they might have drafted 4 starters by the year 2026 on this roster out of this class alone. Talk to us a little bit about why you gave the Cleveland Browns an A.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it is the trade. I like Travis Hunter a lot. He was the number 1 player on my board, but he's not somebody who comes into a team that doesn't have a quarterback and transforms you. The Browns were not going to be a demonstrably better team with Travis Hunter on the roster. They need a quarterback. They need help at other positions as well. So they trade back. They get an extra 1st round pick next year. Between their pick and the Jaguars pick, they will get a quarterback next year. Like I said, there are a bunch of quarterbacks that look like they're trending towards 1st round status. I would say there's probably 3 quarterbacks who are going to go in the 1st round. There's some other guys who, if they continue developing on their trajectory, could enter that range as well. So the Browns, either just by being bad and getting a top 5 pick, getting a quarterback, or maybe they're decent, but they can use those 2 picks from both them and the Jaguars. The Jaguars, who, by the way, might not be good. Like that was not a good team last year, and they didn't do a ton to change their fate. That could potentially be 2 top 10 picks where they could potentially either use one of those picks on a quarterback or trade up. So that trade is a big part of it. That was one of the best trades we've ever seen in the history of the draft in terms of the value that they got back. Now, the players that they picked, Mason Graham, he's going to start for them immediately. He's going to be an impact pass rusher. That's one of the safer picks in the draft. Carson Schwarzenegger in the 2nd round. Don't love taking an off-ball safety, but he looks like a very safe pick. Just a good combination of what looks like football IQ and athleticism. Quinshad Judkins, and then I'll talk about Dylan Sampson, their 4th round pick, together because they doubled up on running backs. You can very clearly see the types of players that those 2 guys are, and think that the Browns are probably thinking we might have gotten our Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, or at the very least, they're going to use them in that way. They've got the more power between the tackles, runner and Quinshad Judkins, to be the Nick Chubb for them, the premium back for them that they're hoping they can develop him into. And then Dylan Sampson hopefully is the Hunt, a little bit more of explosive, a little bit more of the passing game type of guy. That if those players hit, you've got a 2-headed monster in the backfield, just like the Browns had for a few years with Chubb and Hunt. And then Harold Fannin in the 3rd round, a fantastic tight end. He is sort of Tyler Warren light. He did it in the MAC, so you've got to take what his production with a little bit of a grain of salt. But any tight end, especially one that doesn't necessarily have blazing speed, when he's the only weapon on offense and yet somehow he's open every single time to lead the nation in receiving, that's crazy. That takes a special skill set that's almost hard to quantify, to be able to get open every single time, even when the defense knows the ball is coming to you on every play. That's such a unique skill set that I think it's going to translate to the NFL, because we just don't see a lot of players who are able to do that, even at the college level. So I really love that pick in the 3rd round. You look at those first 4 guys, those are probably starters for them, plus Sampson, who's sort of like a 1B type of running back. the Browns made an unbelievable trade and then crushed the draft with 4 likely starters.
And then real quick on Dylan Gabriel, going after him in the 3rd round and then doubling back on Shedeur Sanders in the 5th round. What's your thought process on how that came about and the reaction in the draft room? They claimed that they were just tired at that point in time, but how do you view that quarterback room right now and the selection of those 2 in this year's draft?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, you could say from a value perspective, Shedeur Sanders was one of the greatest values ever, at least in terms of where we expected him to go. But I initially wrote down A+ for the Browns and then decided to downgrade it because of the 2 quarterback picks. Because Sanders and Gabriel are never going to play for the Browns if they don't play this year. Like, yeah, maybe if this season goes south with Joe Flacco and or Kenny Pickett late in the season, sure, they could put Sanders and or Gabriel out there just to see what they've got. But like I said, they've got 2 picks in next year's draft. And if the season does go south, the Browns pick is going to be early, and they're probably going to use, even if it doesn't, they're probably going to use those picks to trade up and get a quarterback. So why are you spending 2 picks on a quarterback who might never play for you? Like, one of those guys could get cut. Because like I said, you've got Joe Flacco, you've got Kenny Pickett, and now you've got Flacco and Sanders. Or one of those guys is probably, or Gabriel and Sanders, one of those guys is probably going to get cut or at least stashed on your practice squad. It's just weird. And then especially for one of those picks to be Sanders, like, you've just invited a circus. Deion's going to be tweeting about it every time Gabriel makes a mistake. He's going to, throw an interception in a preseason game, and Deion's going to be tweeting about it. Do you really want to deal with that headache between your 3rd and 4th string quarterbacks? It just seems like a ridiculous situation to put yourself into. So those are actually the picks I like least. But like I said, I went through all of the reasons why you can love this Browns draft, and I didn't even mention Shedeur Sanders. So if they end up cutting him, if he ends up being a little bit of a distraction in the preseason, oh well. They made a great trade and they added a bunch of future starters.
Well, you went through all the reasons you love the Cleveland Browns draft. We went through all 32 teams and gave you draft grades for every single one of them. If you love this type of content, make sure that you're subscribed to our channel. It's growing fast, but we need you on board. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button at the bottom and give us a thumbs up. We really appreciate that support. Ryan, excellent job as always throughout this draft season. We look forward to your invaluable contributions throughout our book writing process as we turn the page literally and figuratively towards writing our 2025 football preview book that'll be hitting bookshelves very soon. So you can pre-order that up at sharp.football. You can pick up the draft kit as well, especially if you're preparing for rookie drafts. Make sure that you use the code SHOW5 to get a discount on the rookie draft kit. We'll see you guys next week.